I count for a living. Assets, liabilities, the exact moment a number stops adding up. So when I found my name on my own sister's seating chart, printed in a font small enough to be an afterthought, assigned to a folding chair by the kitchen doors, I did what I always do when something doesn't reconcile. I took a photograph of it, time-stamped, before anyone could move the card. My family has never liked how good my memory is for details they'd rather forget. That's the story. Not the chair. The chair was just the first document. Welcome back to Calm Revenge Tales, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that boundaries have a price. If stories about dignity, documents, and consequences are your thing, drop a comment and subscribe, because this one has a paper trail longer than the guest list. I'm a forensic accountant, 38 years old. I spend my days finding the money people hoped nobody would notice was missing, a shell company here, a loan that was never a loan, a signature that doesn't match the one on file 3 years earlier. It is patient work. Nobody hires a forensic accountant because they trust the numbers. They hire one because somewhere, quietly, something has already gone wrong, and they need someone who won't flinch at finding it. I learned that instinct at home, long before I learned it in an office. My husband, David, used to tease me that I fell in love with him the way I fall in love with a clean ledger slowly, and only after I'd checked everything twice. We had 11 years together. Quiet ones. He taught high school biology and kept a jar of hard candy on his desk for the kids who forgot their lunch. He died in March, a year and a half ago now, of the kind of cancer that gives you time to say everything and somehow still leaves things unsaid. I do not talk about that part often. I mention it here only because it matters to what happens later and because grief, like fraud, tends to surface in places you didn't expect to look. My family runs on a particular kind of arithmetic. My mother is the ledger keeper of affection, though she'd never call it that. My sister, Renata, has always been the receivable, the one owed things, the one whose needs were simply facts of the household weather, like rain. And I was the one who paid. Not literally, not always. But emotionally, logistically, the one who drove 4 hours on a Tuesday because Mom's knee was bad, who paid for the caterer's deposit when Renata's first wedding fell through, who sat with Dad in the hospital the week David and I were supposed to be in Portugal for our anniversary. No arguments, no invoice submitted. Nobody ever asked me to be that person. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the only gift I have to offer this story. I became it the way sediment becomes rock, through pressure over time, without anyone particularly deciding it should happen. And a family, once it has assigned you a role, does not like to see the casting change. The wedding invitation arrived 9 months after David's funeral. Renata was marrying a contractor named Glenn, a big, easy laugher who called everyone chief, and the wedding was to be the kind of production our family had never actually been able to afford, but had always behaved as though it could. Mom called to ask if I'd help with the flowers, meaning, pay for the flowers. I said yes. I always said yes. It was, I think, the last uncomplicated yes I gave anyone in my family. The invitation itself came addressed to me and David both. Nobody had updated it. I noticed, filed it away, said nothing. That was 3 months before the wedding, and it was the first entry in a ledger I didn't yet know I was keeping. I want to tell you about a phone call I overheard in July, because it's the moment the story actually begins, even though nobody in my family would tell it that way. They would tell you the story starts at the reception. They're wrong. It starts on a Tuesday evening on my mother's back porch, where I'd gone to return a casserole dish and instead stood very still outside the screen door because I heard my own name. It was my mother and my sister. Renata was talking about table assignments. She's coming alone, she said, meaning me. David's gone, so it's not really a +1 situation anymore, is it? I don't want to waste a seat at a family table on someone who's just going to be sad the whole time. My mother's response was worse, because it was softer. She'll understand. She's practical. I did not make a sound. I want to be honest about that, because a lesser version of this story would have me confronting them on the porch, dish in hand, voice rising. That is not what happened. What happened is that I stood there for 11 seconds, I counted them, the way I count everything, and then I knocked, handed over the dish, said the lasagna pan was in the car, and drove home. That night I opened the email folder where I keep everything I've ever paid for on my family's behalf. Flower deposit. Caterer deposit for Renata's first, canceled engagement. The $4,000 I wired Mom 2 winters ago when the furnace went, no promissory note, no expectation of repayment, just a daughter doing the thing daughters do. I didn't know yet what I would do with this information. I only knew that I wanted it gathered, dated, and true. Old habits. The habits of a woman who has spent her whole career understanding that the difference between a family story and a fraud case is often just which one somebody eventually writes down. I sat with the seating chart photo, the one I'd take 3 weeks later at the venue walkthrough, when I saw my name typed under kitchen overflow/staff and +1s for a long time that night, though of course I hadn't taken it yet. I sat with the porch conversation the way I'd later sit with the photo. Same stillness. Same instinct to keep it unaltered, in case I ever needed to prove that a thing had actually been said. I want to tell you what I found 6 weeks later, because it is the reason everything after makes sense, and because it did not come from anger. It came from an attorney's office on a Thursday afternoon, in a beige conference room with a box of tissues placed with the particular optimism of someone who has learned that families rarely leave that room dry-eyed. David's estate had a delayed clause I hadn't fully understood at the time we wrote our wills, both of us young, in our 30s, doing what responsible people do, not expecting either of us would need it for decades. But David's mother had died the year before him, and in the settling of her small estate, a parcel of land in the town where he grew up, 11 acres, inherited, undeveloped, unremarkable to look at but sitting, as it turned out, on a mineral rights lease a natural gas company had quietly been paying into for 3 years, had passed to David, and through David's will, to me. Outright. No conditions. My name on the deed, recorded, county-stamped, real. The attorney, a soft-spoken man named Feldman who had handled David's family's affairs for 2 decades, slid the folder across the table and said, "I want to walk through this slowly. Because I don't think you understood the scope of it when you signed the original will." He was right. I hadn't. The lease payments alone, backdated and current, totaled just under $210,000, sitting in an escrow account David's mother had set up and never told anyone about except her attorney. The land itself was valued, conservatively, at 4 times that. I read the deed 3 times. Not because I doubted it. Because I am a woman who does not act on anything she has only read once. There was a second document in the folder, thinner, easy to miss. A letter, handwritten, from David's mother to David, dated 4 years before her death, that Feldman had been instructed to give to whoever inherited the land, when the time was right. It said, in part, that she'd watched enough families fight over land to know she wanted this one protected, not divided, not shared, not treated as a pot to be split among whoever showed up loudest when the money surfaced. She wanted it to go to someone who would actually use it, or at minimum, not squander it out of guilt. One line of that letter I have not been able to put down since. Land doesn't care how loud you cry over it. It only knows who's still standing there in the spring. I did not act on any of this yet. I put the folder in my car, drove home, and read the letter a second time at my kitchen table, and a third time before bed. Calm is not the same thing as weak. My family had confused the two my entire life, and I understood, sitting there, that I was under no obligation to keep correcting them for free. By August, my family had heard a version of the news, not the details, just the shape of it. Somebody at David's mother's church had mentioned the gas lease to somebody who knew my mother, and the shape of the rumor arrived at our family the way rumors always do in mine, exaggerated, urgent, and instantly treated as a shared asset. Renata called me twice in 1 week, both times opening with wedding logistics before pivoting, with the subtlety of a woman who has never needed subtlety, to ask whether I'd thought about what to do with all that land money. My mother, over dinner, mentioned that Dad's truck needed transmission work if you're feeling flush. Nobody asked me how I was doing. Nobody asked about David at all. They asked about the escrow account like it already had their names on it. The confrontation, when it came from my sister, 2 weeks before the wedding, in my own kitchen. She sat where David used to sit. I noticed that and said nothing. I just think, she said, stirring coffee she hadn't asked for milk in, that it would be really weird for you to sit on all that money while I'm starting a whole new life. Glenn's business needs a truck. That's family money in a way. David would have wanted us taken care of. I asked her one question. I did not raise my voice. Which part of David's will did you read that in? She didn't have an answer. She had never read anything David wrote. Nobody in my family had asked me a single question about David's actual wishes, only about David's actual money. I called my attorney the next morning. I told her to prepare letters, formal notice that I would not be advancing, lending, or gifting any portion of the estate to any family member, effective immediately, and that any further requests should be directed to her office in writing. If you've ever watched people who couldn't spare one afternoon for you suddenly find all the time in the world once money enters the room, you already know exactly where this goes. Stick with me. The wedding arrived on a Saturday in September at a restored barn venue 2 hours from my mother's house, string lights and hay bale seating for the ceremony and, for the reception, a seating chart I had already photographed 3 weeks earlier at the walkthrough. My name, typed in a smaller font than everyone else's, under a heading someone had chosen with real intention, kitchen overflow/staff and +1s. I was assigned a folding chair. When I'd asked the coordinator, gently, why, she'd checked her clipboard and said, not unkindly, that's where +1s sit, hon. Your sister said you'd understand, since it's just you now. I understood. I understood completely. I sat in the folding chair for the ceremony without complaint, because a woman who has spent a career gathering evidence does not tip her hand before the room is full. The reception moved into toasts around 8. Glenn's best man went first, then my mother, who cried prettily and said family was the only inheritance that mattered, a line I noted for its irony and said nothing about. Then Renata stood, glass raised, and thanked everyone who showed up for us this year, the real way, not just when it was convenient, and I understood. Watching several relatives nod toward me with the practiced sympathy of people delivering a verdict they'd already rehearsed, that this toast had been built, in part, as a message. She sat down. My mother caught my eye and gave the small nod she'd always used to signal that a scene had concluded and I should now do the graceful thing, which in my family has always meant the quiet thing, which has always meant the thing that costs me something. I asked for the floor. My mother smiled, relieved, assuming I intended to bless the marriage and smooth things over, the way I always had. She handed me the room the way you hand a child a broom, expecting sweeping, not evidence. I did not raise my voice at any point. I want that understood. I said I was glad to be there and that I loved my sister, both of which were true. Then I said that I'd like to clear up a rumor that had been circulating in the family since August, because as an accountant, I dislike bad math more than I dislike almost anything. I named the land. I named the escrow figure, $209,640 as of the most recent statement, because I do not deal in round numbers when exact ones are available. I named the date on the deed. I said that the land and its proceeds belong to me outright, per David's will and his mother's estate, with no contingency, no shared ownership, and no clause requiring family distribution. A fact several people in that room had apparently discussed at length without once asking me. The room did the thing rooms do. Soft murmuring first, a kind of embarrassed shifting. Then my mother, emotional, said I was making David's death about money at her daughter's wedding. I said, quietly, that I'd learned to make things about money from watching this family make everything about money except when it involved actually offering me any. Then it went loud. Glenn's uncle stood up, said something about how some people think they're too good for a folding chair. My aunt said I'd always been cold. Renata, red-faced, said I was ruining her wedding on purpose, that I'd clearly been planning this, that this was cruel. I answered each escalation with a quieter sentence than the one before it, because I have learned that volume is a request for someone to match your fear, and I did not have any fear left to spend that night. I said, I photographed the seating chart 3 weeks ago. Kitchen overflow, staff, and plus ones. I have the timestamp. I set my phone on the table, screen up, photo visible to whoever wanted to lean in and look. Nobody did. Everybody understood exactly what was on it. Then I placed the letter on the table. Not the whole letter, I read one line aloud, the one I'd underlined 3 times in the privacy of my own kitchen. Land doesn't care how loud you cry over it. It only knows who's still standing there in the spring. I said David's mother wrote that 4 years before she died, for whoever would eventually hold that land, and that I intended to honor it, whether or not anyone in the room understood why. Glenn, to his credit, and I want to be fair here, because this story is not about villains, it's about people who told themselves a story that was convenient. Glenn put his hand on Renata's shoulder and said, quietly, Rin, maybe we let this go tonight. It was the only conscience in the room that night, and it earned him nothing beyond my noticing it, because a hand on a shoulder does not undo 3 weeks of a folding chair. I said one more thing before I left. I said, I hope the truck gets fixed. I hear a transmission's expensive when nobody's willing to cover it for you. Then I picked up my coat, my folder, and my phone, and I drove home alone, the way I'd driven to that porch in July, the way I'd driven home from Feldman's office in August. Calm the whole way. Here is what happened after, in plain numbers, because numbers are the only closing argument I trust. The land stayed mine. The escrow account, as of this recording, sits at $226,000, still accruing lease payments quarterly. I did not give my mother money for the truck or for anything else, that year or since. My attorney's letters were sent the Monday after the wedding, formalizing what I'd said at the reception: no loans, no gifts, no exceptions, all future requests in writing. Nobody has written. Renata and I speak twice a year now at holidays, in the careful, weather report tone people use when a relationship has been reduced to logistics. My mother called once, in October, to say I'd embarrassed the family, and I told her, without anger, that the family had embarrassed itself in April when it assigned my name to a folding chair by the kitchen, and that I'd simply been the one to bring documentation. She hasn't called since about the money. She has called about other things, smaller, kinder things, and I have answered, because I am not interested in punishing her forever. I am interested in her understanding, permanently, that there is a difference between family and a line of credit. Glenn, for what it's worth, texted me in November, unprompted, and said he was sorry about the chair, that he hadn't known until that night. I believe him. I told him so. The letter from David's mother lives in a fireproof box in my closet now, alongside David's will and the original deed. I take it out sometimes, not often, usually in spring, when the lease payment lands, and I drive out to walk the 11 acres myself, alone, boots in the wet grass. I put a bench out there last year, simple cedar, facing east, where David used to say the light came in best. That's the act of honor, if you're looking for one. Not a headline, not a foundation with his name on it, nothing anyone would applaud. Just a bench, on land his mother trusted me to keep whole, so that on the mornings I need to sit somewhere and remember him, I have a place that was never a folding chair. I don't think of what happened at that wedding as revenge. I think of it as the day I stopped making payments on a debt I never actually agreed to carry. Families like to tell you that love and money are separate ledgers. Mine taught me, the hard way, that you find out which one a person actually believes in only when both come due on the same night. If this reminded you that quiet people keep the receipts and that boundaries are allowed even with blood, take that as your sign. Update what needs updating. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.